All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining in. I'm really excited to have Abbie here with us today, and I will let Abbie introduce themselves before we get started. What Abbie and I had discussed was that they're going to do a little bit of talking about the work that they do. And then if anybody has questions, you guys can jump in. As always, you can feel free to unmute yourself when you have questions, or you can type them in the Zoom chat. So I will turn things over to Abbie now.
Hello, lovely humans. I'm so glad you're here this evening. My name is Abbie Rolf. My pronouns are they, them. Before we jump in, I obviously am new to, joining you all as a guest. So I want to acknowledge that the land that I'm coming to you from is unceded Seminole territory, and that I'm occupying that space. So who the heck am I, and why am I here with you tonight? I'm a registered mental health counselor intern. I'm in private practice. My office is in Largo. I specialize in transgender and gender diverse adults, and I proudly serve the entire LGBTQ plus community, consensually non-monogamous adults, and those who practice BDSM and kink. I am also I think it's important to share my kind of intersectional identities so you know where I'm coming from as a person and kind of the things that color my lenses. And my intersectional identities include both marginalization and privilege. So I am a person of transgender experience. I'm genderqueer and gender fluid. I am a sexual minority as a pansexual queer person. I'm a consensually non-monogamous person. I am non-religious, and I'm an adoptee. I'm also white. I come from an upper middle class socioeconomic status background. I am educated, and I've had access to quite a few things because of what the privilege has brought me. So speaking of that education, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology I earned in 2007 from Illinois State University. And I earned my master's degree through Argosy University and finished at National Louis University June of 2019. So I'm pretty fresh. My practice has not quite been open a year. I've rented the space for a year, but I officially opened in August of last year when I got my registered intern number. So how did I get started in working with trans and gender diverse people? This requires a little backstory. I went into grad school with the intention that I was going to study birth trauma and obstetric violence. I'm a planner and a prepper, and so way back in my undergrad, I realized at some point in my life, I want to be a birthing human. So I started to kind of follow birth blogs, and I came upon this phenomena of birth trauma and obstetric violence where people experience pretty traumatic events through the process of giving birth. And so got super interested in that. That's what I interviewed for grad school. And then my first course was social and cultural competencies. And I started to kind of explore my own gender. And I had always been more tomboyish, more masculine in my expression, more comfortable around masculine individuals. And quite frankly, in romantic relationships, I had always been the person in a more masculine role, even when I was in heterosexual relationships. So exploring my own gender, and full disclaimer, I have permission to share and out my partner. Please do not out trans or queer people without their permission. So shortly after I started grad school, still within my first semester, I started dating a trans man and kind of saw what his experience had been like. And I was floored at the overlap between my interest in birth trauma and obstetric violence. Shame, guilt, anxiety, external locus of control, trauma, loss, family dysfunction, all of those pieces that I had fallen in love with birth trauma came up with gender minority people too. So I realized this is it. This is my jam. And so I chose that this was going to be my niche. And mind you, I had joined several professional Facebook groups, and a lot of them talked about niching down and figuring out, where you want to be professionally. And I realized this was it for me. So what I chose to do was I curated my grad school experience as much as possible around gender minority individuals and their experiences. So my careers class was all about how people lose their work history when they legally transition, because they have to make the choice to either come out to future employers or come out to past employers, or lose all of their work history and experience altogether. And I did similar things throughout my grad school courses. I also started taking trainings, and I started seeking professional consultation. So I became a member of WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, in 2017. So I've been a member for almost 3 years, almost ready to qualify for a board position, maybe. And so I sought out a gender therapist. She practices out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and she runs a monthly consultation group. We meet for an hour and a half, and it's with therapists specializing in gender across the nation. And I started taking trainings. And first I started out with free trainings because, let's be real, student life's expensive. So there's right? Roma's got me there. Yes. So I started out the Fenway Institute through the National LGBT Health Education Center. They have a bunch of free trainings for working with trans and gender diverse people and LGBTQ plus people in general, not just behavioral health trainings, but how to make your office more queer and trans friendly. So if you're not going to specialize, if you don't, let's be real, you can expect to not see queer and trans clients, but it's going to happen. The National LGBT Health Education Center at Fenway. You can expect to not see queer and trans clients in your practice or an agency, but the reality is you will. So you have to make a choice. Do you want to be queer and trans affirming and friendly and create a space where folks are open to sharing their authentic self, where they can bring all of their authentic self, or not? And that's up to you and your practice. So creating spaces, doing the easy trainings, the free trainings, the trainings that are for no CEUs, but you get a contact certificate, which means nothing. Really, the CEUs mean nothing until you're ready for licensure. So then I started seeking out trainings by people of trans experience, so other trans professionals, because who better to get the training from than people with lived experience? Otherwise, it's kind of an about me without me experience. So started doing those trainings. I've taken trainings about queering marriage and LGBT marriage. I then started to provide the trainings myself. So I currently provide trainings about writing letters, referral letters, and assessments for gender affirming medical intervention. So that's hormone therapy or any kind of surgery. And I and Dr. Christina are 2 of the 4 providers across the state of Florida who provide those letters for free. So here's my little soapbox, right? So what does it mean to provide a letter for free for somebody? I've seen people pay upwards of $1,200 for a single letter to get hormone therapy. And that's not the session fee, that's the actual letter that they paid for. Okay, so what is that to getting hormone therapy? You can go to Planned Parenthood and get on hormone therapy without a letter. So these people were essentially held emotionally hostage, financially hostage, to getting life-saving access to medical care to get a letter, to pay that money. So my choosing not to charge, and this is just me and my philosophy, is a radical act that I refuse to pass on the financial burden of a pathologizing system to people who are just trying to access medical care. Because let's be real, I can go to Planned Parenthood and get on birth control, which is hormone therapy, without a doctor saying anything. Cisgender women can go to a plastic surgeon and get breast augmentation or just lost the word, sorry, brain fart, chest reduction surgery without a letter from a psychiatrist, psychologist, or therapist. Cisgender people can access these medical services that transgender people then have to go through a therapist saying that they're capable of making an informed decision about their care. So much of my practice is through that lens that I am doing this as a radical act, and not just the letters, but really everything with my clients. So I will tell you the vast majority of presenting issues that I see are anxiety, depression, shame, trauma, and grief. And I'm going to bet that you all have had classes and talked about all of those already, which is stellar foundation. The additional piece is understanding the minority stress model and being able to apply that to people who are gender minority individuals. So the minority stress model is great and it is applicable, but you also have to know the certain pieces that affect us. So one example is our access to medical care. There's a really great document that you all can access for free. It's the National Transgender Discrimination Survey. And there was one put out in 2015 and one put out in 2016. Yes, Miranda's shaking her head. And it talks about all of the kind of disparities that trans people face. And a big one is medical. And we are, in a way, healthcare providers and medical adjacent providers. And so many trans people talked about how they had to educate their providers. Now, the way that I frame it to my clients is that they are the expert on their experience. They are the expert in the room when it comes to them. And it's my responsibility as their provider to have at least a basic knowledge of what the heck's going on. So it's my responsibility to have that basic knowledge, at the very least, about being a gender minority, or being a racial minority, or being a relationship structure minority. And it's my job to educate myself. I also frame it for my clients as, if you come in and I say something that doesn't sit right, tell me. Tell me when I need to do more education on my own, because that's part of dismantling the power relationship, the power dynamic in the therapy room. Because at the end of the day, our clients are their own experts. We're just along for the ride. So I will tell you, as I'm assuming everybody or nearly everybody is actually located in Florida, there are two training models, or three rather, regarding affirmative care for transgender individuals. There's the Dignity Care model that was created by Dr. Christy Overstreet originally out of Jacksonville. There is the International Transgender Association for Care, ITAC, I think, out of Miami Beach. And then there's a model out of Modern Sex Therapy Institutes. You don't need to be certified to work with trans and gender diverse folks. We don't need that. And to be quite frank, it's a lot of money. Especially being new to the field, it's a lot of money to invest, and you're going to get far more value out of listening to the voices in the community. So asking to go to PFLAG meetings, asking to sit in on support meetings, getting professional consultation from therapists of lived experience is going to garner you so much more insight and value than paying for one of the certification programs. And I know that's one thing that beginning counselors kind of get stuck in is, okay, I'm getting ready to graduate and all I have behind my name is an MA or an MS. What do I do with that? That's okay. Most clients don't look at all the other letters. They're not going to know what your certifications mean or what they stand for. What's going to matter to them is the relationship that they have with you when they sit across from you, either in the therapy room or through telehealth, and the environment that you create for them. Even starting with your forms, when you have intake forms, whether you're an agency or you're in private practice, do your forms ask their pronouns? Please don't use preferred. My pronouns are personal. Please don't use chosen or preferred name. My name is my name. I'll give you the caveat. if you're in a situation where people are using insurance and they have to give their legal name, one way I do that is by asking their name and then legal name for insurance purposes if different, because I want to make sure that I highlight their name first. What do you want me to call you? And then what's on your government paperwork, right? Cool. So that's a little bit about my training, my practice, my version of radical action. So I want to open it up to you all to ask whatever questions that you'd like. And I want to give a disclaimer that these, for me, right, I'm not sure what parameters Dr. Christina has set, but for me, there's no holds barred. I would rather you feel like you can ask me the questions than wonder or not know or be embarrassed. So let me say, nothing is off limits. Nothing is too taboo. Nothing is too personal. Feel free. I'm here offering my emotional labor for you for free, and I am happy to answer those questions. I also want to encourage you to be brave. This is the space to do it. Yes. All right, from Cami, suggestions about names, pronouns, paperwork for kiddos and teens in school. Oh, okay. So kiddos are a tough one because we don't want to out kids to their parents. We don't know what kind of situation they have at home. So as much as possible, collaborate with the kiddo. Ask them what feels safe for them. Advocate for them about what feels safe for them, and have those conversations. If I document your name and pronouns on this form, here's who might see it, because that's informed consent, right, about confidentiality. And take their lead, because at the end of the day, they need you to be that person that they can come to and not have to worry about what they're saying or where it's going. Yeah. And I had another thought about that and I totally just lost it. Sorry, y'all. It's been an under-caffeinated day. Kids and teens are difficult, or can be. Okay, so full disclaimer, I work with adults. I don't see teens. Because they're in that stage of exploring their identity. They're figuring themselves out. So you might, as their school counselor, face a lot of that, oh, they don't know who they are yet. Oh, they're just exploring. Oh, this is just a phase. Chances are it's not. So your place, your position is to hold space for them, let them come to you, and let them guide the way. The 3 training models that I said, they were the Dignity Care Model by Dr. Christy Overstreet, the International ITCA, International Transgender Association of Care, I believe, out of Miami Shores. I could have the acronyms wrong. And then Modern Sex Therapy Institutes has another certification program. More questions?
So I have one about letter writing.
Yes.
You spoke of like sometimes you need to get in the community as well to learn what's best for that person individually. And something that I've been, it's something I should say I rather heard regarding letters is that there's the debate of like, I hate how I have to go to so many XXYZ sessions in order to prove myself before I can get this medicine that will affirm me and that will better my well-being, while others say like there are lots of things I didn't know about when it came to transitioning that I found really useful though, and going through all those XYZ sessions before I got my letter. I was wondering what your stance on that was.
Absolutely. Great question. So there is no therapy requirement for a letter. None. It's recommended for people with genital reconstruction surgeries and facial reconstruction, but it's not required. And so the way that I frame letter writing is that I'm helping people improve their outcomes. Even with that in mind, there's no therapy required, and every letter I've done has been in one session. So the way that I streamline this process is that I give people the resources and research ahead of time. You're coming to me as a grown adult, do your research, and then come to me, and we'll talk about it. And in full transparency, I send out my biopsychosocial in advance. I send all my forms in advance. So people have a chance to fill this stuff out at home. And I have, to streamline the process, I've created questionnaires that I use for every intervention. So I have a hormone therapy questionnaire that I send to people. I have a chest reconstruction surgery that I send to people. And there are things like, have you considered nipples for chest reconstruction? Because there's a risk of nipples falling off if people get a nipple graft. That's a thing to know. Your nipples could fall off. Does the current status of one's chest affect their sex life? Is it potentially going to change? This is a life domain, right, that we're talking about. Persistent emotional distress. Does it affect their lifetime functioning, going to work, going to school, with their social interaction with other people? Who's going to take care of you after surgery? This is one of my favorites. Okay, so I get a lot of letters for top surgery. So I tell folks, okay, so you're a couple months out from surgery. I want you, when you're doing tasks around the house throughout your life, imagine that you're a T-Rex. Because for the first week, maybe 2 after surgery, that's the mobility you're gonna have. So now is the time to be aware. And it, without fail, I get but a T-Rex can't wipe their own butt. To which I respond like this. And it's that moment of insight, right? We love those moments. And so it's improving that person's outcome. So maybe their mom was going to take care of them after surgery. Cool. What's your relationship like with your mom? Well, she's okay with it, but she's not really affirming. Okay, but you're going to have T-Rex arms and probably need help showering and bathing and washing your hair and dressing. Is mom going to be the best person to take on that role? Maybe, maybe not. But it brings it into their sphere of awareness, improving outcomes. Does that help, Miranda?
It does, thank you. Because for me, the letter writing was something I only recently kind of got some mentorship on and got to practice a little bit in a clinical aspect. And a lot of this did come up where there was some frustration for me when it took 3 sessions with a college student who they already have limited sessions to get through all this. And I felt it, in one aspect, rushed, but this was someone who is only first exploring in college, so it felt really important. And so I felt really conflicted about okay, I have to do this, but moving down the road, should I do this?
Right. And that's a really great question to ask yourself, because we have the opportunity to do our own identity development and exploration in or out of therapy. It's not required for us to access medical services. If I wanted to go get birth control, right, I don't have to go explore what is my role as a birthing person and what are my reproductive choices and what do I want to do with my reproductive organs. I just go and do it, right? Because I know who I am. And the reality is, we're not assessing their readiness, because no one can assess that. You're assessing their preparedness and their ability to provide informed consent. And I think that's such an incredibly important distinction to make. When I first started writing letters, I heard them framed as letters of support, which feels super cringy and uncomfortable to me, because who the heck am I as a therapist to say that I support a person's autonomous, self-determined choice to access care and be their authentic self, right? That feels kind of ick. So I saw the reframe to referral letters and the reframe from readiness to preparedness. And that's the way that I frame my letters. And I do so by asking them, what research have you used? What is going to be the out-of-pocket cost? What are the potential implications? We're talking about what are reversible and irreversible changes from hormone therapy, from surgeries. And the reality is, it may not be easy and it may be very costly, but almost everything is reversible except for removal of internal organs. So, for example, a person goes on testosterone. Eventually they decide, for whatever reason, that testosterone isn't right for them, but they've been on it long enough that their voice is dropped, they have facial hair, and they have body hair. Cool. You can do voice training to bring your voice back up. You can have laser or electrolysis for the body and hair removal. Like I said, the only really big can't go back from these kind of things are removal of the reproductive organs. Once they're gone, they're gone. And that's an important distinction to make for people. From Len, thank you. I think it's amazing too. How involved do I have to be? I agree, Miranda's question covered it. And I will tell you, I have people who come to me for one session, for the letter, and that's it. And I will tell you, I have clients who I see for 6 months, and I'm like, so do you want a letter? And they're like, maybe. And then like 6 months in, they're like, okay, I'm ready for my letter. There's no predicting, what a person's journey is going to be like. And I think that is the incredibly important piece with letter writing, that you create a window of opportunity for them, especially doing it based on an informed consent model, trying to break down barriers instead of create them, framing it as improving outcomes, improving their results. You're creating a space for them to come back and say, you know what, that person felt good. That person felt safe. I was able to bring my whole self into the room with them. So now that I've decided that I'm ready for therapy, I want to see them. And that's happened to me too. Not as frequently, but it's there. Other questions? You're welcome. I'm going to start humming the Jeopardy song, y'all. Do, 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 do.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your work with consensual non-monogamy, and I don't know if you want to kind of do it separately or kind of all in one. You also mentioned BDSM and kink and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, I have lived experience as a consensually non-monogamous person. So it just felt like natural for me to also include that within the minority structures that I support in my practice. But lived experience isn't enough. So it's also important to go, again, hearing voices in the community. There are trainings out there for kink-aware and poly-aware professionals. There's actually a kink-aware professionals directory you can access, and there's the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom. A super awesome blog about consensual non-monogamy and polyamory is poly.land. And it is spectacular. And so I started out, of course, lived experience, but then I started reading these things and accessing these things and listening to voices of the community. In order to get more information about being kink and BDSM aware, I already had a FetLife profile, so I started watching. And there are webinars, like actual training webinars, not like freaky webinars, not safe for work, maybe a little bit. Not sexy webinars, there we go. But trainings about being kink aware, about what that means, about what it means to be able to sit with somebody in the room who uses kink as an outlet. And there's a really great article that came up not too long ago about self-harm in kink as a way of externalizing internal pain, and how the pain that's brought on through BDSM and kink can be an incredible outlet for people. I've had clients come into the room who have physical issues, and they use kink and BDSM as a way to control the pain or to experience the pain in a controlled environment. So at the end of the day, what is my role? Figuring out what this does for them, what need it fulfills, and how I can support them in that role. So if it's a client coming in who is consensually non-monogamous, they have a nesting partner with whom they live and or is like life partner equivalent, and they're talking about opening up their relationship. Great. So we're going to explore the different types of consensual non-monogamy. What do you want this to look like? Is this going to be a friend with benefits? Is this going to be a play partner? Is this going to be a committed relationship? What are you looking for? What are the ways that you communicate and negotiate with your partner already? And how can we make those things transferable to your relationships, your romantic relationships? So again, we're coming back to the basics that we work on with clients, right? Conflict resolution, communication, negotiation. I mean, shoot, if we're talking about household chores, we're talking about negotiation with people. So it's all of those foundational pieces that you wrap up in a happy little package that, again, lets people bring their whole self into the room. Also, there are training programs about consensual non-monogamy and about kink. And again, it's important to be aware of who you're receiving training from. Are you receiving training from a person with lived experience in the community? Or is this an about me without me situation? There's an incredible conference. Of course, it's not happening in Florida now because Corona land. But it's called the Florida Power Exchange, and it happens annually in Tampa. And there's a professional track where you can go and watch dungeon demonstrations and learn firsthand from the people in the power dynamic relationships what these things should look like, what it would look like in a healthy way, how to recognize a BDSM relationship from an abusive relationship. And then you get to be there firsthand meeting people and, hint, hint, networking and marketing within the community if these are folks that you want to serve. Yes, Lynn, absolutely. And I will readily say that I see people who are on the receiving end of the misogyny more than the person who is perpetrating the misogyny. Because in order for them to be in my office, they have to acknowledge that there's something not quite sitting right, right? They have to be in that stage of change where they're acknowledging that something isn't quite healthy with the relationship. So I will have clients who come in, again, with the internalized misogyny, and we'll talk about if it's someone else. If you were teaching, largely, this is the best way that works. If you were teaching somebody else about BDSM or consensual non-monogamy or power dynamic relationships, how would you describe a healthy power dynamic? Would it include XYZ misogyny? And chances are you're going to have a few moments of insight and the purple smoke coming out when people realize, oh, well, I wouldn't tell that to somebody else that was healthy. Okay, so then we can start talking about internalized shame and feelings of self-worth. And where is that coming from? That people are choosing to be in unhealthy relationships. Not that BDSM is unhealthy, or that even like full-time collared relationships are unhealthy, but rather those relationships that have that misogyny or internalized misogyny. And I think it's really great, like, especially for young folks who are assigned female at birth, or cis women, would you tell your sister that this was okay? Would you tell your best friends that this is okay? Chances are the answer is going to be no. And I think those are some of the best reframes for people when you can relate it to somebody else that's close to them who they love and care about. Because oftentimes an individual's inner critic is going to be so loud, especially if you're serving people with anxiety, which will probably be the vast majority of you because anxiety is rampant. So taking a look at that person's inner critic, taking a look at their feelings of value and worthiness. Do they believe that they are deserving of being treated with respect and dignity? In BDSM relationships, especially the domination and submissive relationships, the submissive should be in charge. The submissive is the one who guides the relationships, who guides the dynamics, who sets the boundaries. And it's the dominant's responsibility to respect those and hold them. And then also to provide care and recovery and reconnection after the fact. So if you have a dominant who they and their sub are engaging in scenes and then they're just kind of abandoning the sub after, like, okay, scene's done, that's not healthy. So maybe they're new and maybe they don't know. So then we can talk about some psychoeducation, the educational pieces. You know, let's talk about attachment and bonding and how you have created an attachment with this person and it's important to maintain that even when the scene is over as a transition period. And maybe it's that they don't want to. And that's the point at which we're talking about unhealthy relationships and why is this person in this power dynamic relationship. Ethical concerns when working with BDSM and potential presence of self-harm in it. So, Garrett, great question. I love when people come in and will admit self-harm or will admit that there is knife play or cutting or some kind of physical harm coming up during BDSM or kink play. And my question is, what does it do for you and what is your intent? If the intent is not to hurt myself, kill myself, I'm going to document. I'm also going to document that they're risk aware. And we're going to explore, okay, what are the risks to this? Are you aware of those risks? Do you have a safe word? What are your, what measures do you have in place with your play partners or with your dominants that you put in place to make sure that you're safe? And do you feel safe with all of your play partners? That's how I see my role. The phrase used to be with kink, safe, sane, and consensual. We've realized that using the word sane is kind of ableist. So now it's risk-aware consensual kink, which I think is spectacular because if you're aware of the risk, you're consenting, that's the best thing you can possibly do. So in that situation, Garrett, making sure that I know as their therapist, what is the intent, what need is being fulfilled, and are they aware of the risks? Is there ever a situation where I would discourage someone from doing BDSM completely? I want to say no. However, I think there are situations where I would encourage people to do some healing before doing scenes, especially if you have someone who recently came out of an unhealthy power dynamic, whether it was a BDSM relationship or an intimate partner violence relationship that was completely unrelated to any kind of BDSM. BDSM can be great and healing in those situations. And I also think it's important for the person to develop ideas of what is a healthy relationship and what is a healthy power dynamic first. However, at the end of the day, I'm seeing adults who are self-determined. So we're also going to talk about harm reduction. Okay, so if you're choosing to engage in this, cool, rock on, you're an adult. What are potential pitfalls that you see of engaging in BDSM, of engaging in whatever kind of kink or whatever kind of power exchange? And oftentimes when you bring things into the client's sphere of awareness like that, like what do you see as the potential pitfalls? It's not coming from me as the expert. It's coming from them as the person with the lived experience. And, oh, well, this could probably happen. I could probably have flashbacks, or maybe I could lose control, or maybe I could fall into a similar relationship pattern. So approaching with curiosity. Yeah, again, I want to say that I wouldn't discourage people. And I also have no facial filter, like if that hasn't been clear. So if a person's telling me that, it's entirely possible that my face is going to be like, okay, like, maybe not the best idea. And I'm also not going to be having those conversations unless I have that relationship with the client. I'm not going to have the conversation in their intake of, do you really think that that's a good life choice for you? Or do you really think that that's a healthy decision? No, we don't have that relationship. Who the heck am I? I developed that relationship with them, the rapport with them. Again, you're creating the space for them to bring their whole self into the therapy room. And by bringing their whole self, that also means that you, as their therapist, are capable of holding space for their whole self without impressing your values upon them. And it's hard. We're humans. We are fallible humans with our own value systems, with our own core beliefs, with our own worldviews. And at the end of the day, it's not about us, which is really hard sometimes to hold space for. Hey, Roma. Important pieces to prep them going forward on their journey after graduation. Oh, beautiful question. Okay, so life is hard. And the unfortunate reality is that the world is pretty dangerous for trans people. So if you're looking at it from a CBT lens and people are talking about being afraid, you need to talk about the reality is that there is risk, that it is important for them to be aware of their surroundings, what environments they're getting into. It's also important for folks, particularly gender minority folks, to connect with community. So they're graduating high school. Where are they going? Are they going to college? Is there a pride center that they can link up with? Are they moving out of town, maybe somewhere else? Is there a PFLAG that they can hook up with? Somewhere that they can link up with other community members so they don't feel isolated. Because for anyone in the LGBTQIAP+ community, isolation is one of the most harmful things that we face, because we are already the minority. And then when we're isolated, it's even more so, and those feelings are amplified. I would also recommend having a packet, because if folks are looking at graduation, they're looking at turning 18 if they haven't already. So having information for them about legal name and gender marker change, having resources for them to access hormone therapy if they haven't been able to already, because let's be real, there are a lot of parents who are really afraid of hormone therapy. And when people turn 18, they have the ability to access without their parents. So having those resources available to them. I would also add the caveat, if they're going to be living at home after graduation and they have expressed to you interest in starting hormone therapy, helping them be aware of risks, benefits, and implications. One of those pieces, if you're living at home and your parents haven't agreed to hormone therapy and you're going to start taking it, within 3 months, they're going to see the changes. So you need to be aware, what are your risks of whatever? What are your risks of legal name and gender marker change if you're going to be living at home? So largely, the suggestions are going to vary from client to client, but having those resources available, having information available for them, that they can choose to take if they want it. Not necessarily that you have to provide it to them, but even having it in your office, like, hey, here's the thing, like, here's a bowl of condoms, here's a flyer about legal name change, like, help yourself, whatever. So that people can feel less pressure and feel like it's not being pushed on them or forced on them. Again, preparedness versus readiness. Have I ever had anyone tell me something that completely shocked me? Oh my gosh, yes. I will say though that I have learned more about kink than I had ever expected, and in particular, very specific kinks. So what I have learned that clients will do is they're not gonna just jump in about it. They're gonna like tell you, oh yeah, I'm into this kink, and then move on. Or it's usually in like the last 5 minutes of session. Okay, so then I go look it up myself and I'm like, oh, so then I can have this facial expression to the computer alone than somebody in my room. There are kinks out there in all shades and colors. There are sex acts out there in all shades and colors, and more than any of us can ever hold in our brains, even if it's something that you choose to specialize in. So yes, absolutely. And I will say probably the things that I've been most shocked about haven't been related to kink or sex. It's been related to traumas that people have experienced in their lives, the things that you don't expect, the things that grad school doesn't really teach you about. And I will say probably the most emotionally moving have been when clients have come in and talked about childhood trauma. And it's almost as though they've said it so many times, there's no feeling behind it. And that's usually what hits me the hardest or makes me feel the most shocked, is when somebody's talking about being molested as a child or being locked in a room as a child. And they're just telling it to you like, yeah, this is what I had for dinner and I was locked in a room as a kid. And those are usually the moments that shock me the most. And again, I have no facial filter, and I will tell my clients I have no facial filter. Also, my thinking face looks like my pissed off face, so I have to give a disclaimer. So that way clients know, like, if I'm pondering something or thinking about something, it's not because I'm pissed off, it's just, that's my face. Yeah, so Garrett, making offices more friendly for trans folks. Aspects like lighting, seat orientation, absolutely, and those are also pieces of power dynamics. So I have my own office in Largo. I rented a 3-office suite and furnished the whole thing, which is like furnishing 4 living rooms. Not an undertaking I recommend. Unless you love decorating, then rock on. But as I was going through the process of purchasing furniture, something that was really important to me was making sure that the love seats for clients are at the same height or taller than the therapist chairs. Because I don't want it to feel like the therapist is on a throne or the therapist is in some big chair, you know, that overpowers the space in the room, because that's our power dynamic with clients. Lighting largely varies. Dr. Christina is super fortunate and has natural light. I am in an interior office condo, so I don't. So I use lamps and I try to make it super cozy. That's also the vibe that I want for my office. I don't know if y'all have been to like the doctors or the dentist where they have the fluorescent light covers that look like clouds instead of like the painful fluorescent lights. I have those up and down my hallway. So it doesn't feel like you're in an office. It feels like you're in somebody's living room. You can come and get cozy. And I will tell you one dynamic, big dynamic piece that is often not talked about is what we wear. So if you're in an agency or you're at a hospital setting, you're probably going to have a pretty strict dress code. If you're in private practice, it's entirely up to you. I am barefoot in my practice 90% of the time, only not when it's too cold, and then I wear socks. I'm usually in capris or jeans and a t-shirt because that's what my clients come in wearing. And that's what feels most comfortable for me. And that's, again, the vibe that I want to put off. Like, it's chill, it's cool. I usually, okay, Corona land, right? So I've taken off all the soft substances or pieces, but I have a blanket, I have pillows on my love seat usually, and I will have clients come in, kick off their shoes, pull up the blanket, they're holding my big fluffy pillow, and then they're talking about really heavy, deep stuff. And I've created a safe, cozy little cocoon that they can get comfortable and they can talk about heavy shit, and it doesn't feel so bad because it feels like they're in a living room. And my lobby has a coffee and tea maker. So most of them will bring back their cup of hot tea so they have something to hold on to during the session. And it's all pieces of comfort because we know that we're going to touch on stuff that doesn't feel good. So whatever we can do to kind of mitigate that along the way. Now, for trans folks specifically, the number one thing you can do is have an all gender bathroom. And I have a single bathroom stall in my office, and I still got a sign that says all gender restroom. I will add a caveat with this. Please don't get the signs that have like a centaur and a gladiator and a mermaid, because those are really insulting. They're funny and cute, but they're also really insulting because my gender is not a mythical creature. If you want it to be all inclusive, either have a picture of a toilet or all genders welcome or all gender bathroom or just a restroom, something generic and open that isn't making light of the fact that gender minority folks have a really hard time in the bathroom. And unfortunately, many are prone to bladder and UTIs because we're afraid to use the bathroom. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. So in addition to asking name and pronouns on your paperwork, having things like that, I also have, you all might have heard about the Hate Has No Home Here project. It's like those yard signs that say love is love, trans rights are human rights, no human is illegal. So I have a huge poster that when people walk into my office, it's the first thing that they see. And it says things like that: sex work is work, all relationship structures are valid. And it has the trans flag around it. So it lets folks know, hey, this is a safe place for you to be. Little things like that really make the difference for people. It's not so much having like a huge trans pride flag on your wall when you're not a trans person. That seems a little performative. It's having the little things that are going to tell us it's okay to be you here. I have pronoun badges by the front door if people want to wear a pronoun badge into the office. They're little like the name sticker kind of things. Or if they're using a different name that day, there's a Sharpie they can put on a different name. So that way when they come into the room, I can look at that, and that's my cue to recognize the name and pronouns that they're using that day. Office adaptation to make, oh, that was kind of it.
Someone messaged privately that that they really appreciated the way that you clarified the dominant and submissive roles, because they took a course in undergraduate where it was implied more so that the dominants have all the power and the subs have none. And so they thought that it was cool that to recognize that both parties have power, just in very different ways.
Absolutely. And that's unfortunately a really common misconception of the dominant submissive relationship. And really, in many kink relationships, there's a misconception that the person who is having the things done to them is out of control or not in power or is being abused. And the reality is, if it is risk-aware consensual kink, then the person having stuff done to them is really the person that is in control of the scene and what happens. So I'm really glad that I was able to provide that information. I do want to add too about bathrooms. As much as possible, if you have the space, to create a place where people can change. So people right now, obviously telehealth, right? But eventually the world will reopen, eventually, and people will be coming back into offices. And one thing that I've had clients tell me is that they really appreciate that even though my bathroom's small in my office, they have the opportunity that they can come in and change, or they can come in and put makeup on, or they can come in and put on their binder before session. That makes them feel like they can bring all of themselves into the room, that they don't feel like they can be out in the world because it doesn't feel safe for them for one reason or another. So that's another really great option. I would say, eventually, if you're building your own private practice and you have the opportunity, if you can get one of the mirrors that has a little switch where you can actually have it be like a mirror or frosted glass, that would be spectacular, because many trans folks talk about how going to the bathroom in public is also difficult for them because there's usually huge mirrors and folks may not be comfortable with what they see in the mirror, and it may be triggering to their dysphoria.
We have just about 5 more minutes. So if anybody has additional questions, just go ahead and either type them in or unmute yourself.
So something else that I'd like to ask is if you have any particular like resources as far as readings that you recommend for us in any and all categories. I know the importance of, like, again, having authors who have that lived experience rather than those who just talk about it is important, and sometimes it's hard to differentiate. And again, like, I get sucked into Amazon reviews sometimes where I just like feel like I don't know what's the truth before buying something. So just wondering if you had any recommendations.
Yes, absolutely. Hold that thought. Bookshelf to the rescue. A Clinician's Guide to Gender Affirming Care.
Yes, okay, got that one.
Okay, sweet. All 3 of the authors are trans and gender diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Also, trans bodies, trans selves.
Okay.
Top 2 reading suggestions that I have for anybody interested in working with trans and gender diverse people, because these are voices of the community, and especially from the Clinician's Guide, you're hearing it from clinicians who all have doctorate advanced degrees who are also trans and gender diverse. And I think that's so important to recognize. Great question. And it is, really, my Amazon wish list for books is like inordinate. And I will add the caveat. There's a book out by Sam Killerman. And it's like, I can't remember what it's called, but it has the genderbread person on the front. Please don't buy it. Please don't give him money.
He stole that, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad to finally like have figured that out as well, because I did use that as personally. Yeah,
and that's a know better, do better kind of scenario, where when you learn that he stole or plagiarized the concept and the information from trans people of color and then used it to monetize on it as a cis white man, that's pretty gross. Mm-hmm. So we know better, do better.
And I guess this kind of runs into that, and I apologize if I'm monopolizing question time. Like, what's the difference between like that and gender unicorn? Because again, I don't know too much about gender unicorn either, and I'm just like, oh no, because it, in theory, from an outside perspective that I admittedly hold, like, these seem like great resources for those who are really exploring and like have this tangible thing they can look at. But then again, I hear all these really bad things about them because of the plagiarism, stealing, and like using them for profit.
Right. And one of the issues with the gender unicorn is that first, bisexual people who are interested in having threesomes with couples, typically it's cis women who are interested in having sex with couples, are called unicorns. So that's a term that's already kind of been coined. Also, my gender is not a mythical creature or an animal. There's also a gender elephant. I think that those are tools that can be great for foundational and rudimentary exploration for people who don't understand the difference in the concepts. Okay. Where sex is assigned at birth, affectional and romantic orientation refers to how we relate to other people. Our gender is our self-perceived expression or self-perception of our own experience. So foundationally, yes, with an asterisk. However, I put in the chat box, I highly recommend Transaction Canada's Gender Galaxy. It's amazing. Okay. They also have a sexuality galaxy, and it really highlights how people are rarely one thing. Gender can be very fluid, sexuality can be fluid, kind of like how I mentioned that I'm a person of trans experience and I'm gender queer and gender fluid. Those are 3 gender identity labels. And so it's important to see like how pieces overlap. And I think that's a much better recommendation. I would also add, there's another great book called You and Your Gender Identity by Dara Hoffman Fox. They are a non-binary therapist. Let's check, Cami. I think so. Probably. I'm gonna guess yes. Yes. Yes, it is. Great catch. So You and Your Gender Identity by Dara Hoffman Fox is a really great book. Again, non-binary author, and it walks people through the process of exploring their own gender. I would also encourage, I think it's incredibly important for any person, any therapist who's going to be working with potentially any trans client, do your own gender work. Deconstruct your own ideas about how you experience gender and your gender expression and how that's different from your internalized perception of self. Then it kind of gives you a glimpse into what it's like for us trying to figure ourselves out. Because once you start deconstructing those things, it's kind of amazing what can come up for you and figuring out where they came from.
Thank you for those recommendations and for helping me learn a little bit more about like the ones not to use, especially.
Yeah, my pleasure. That's why I'm here.
All right, anything else, any final questions or comments before we wrap up for tonight?
Thank you all for being here, for being brave, for asking the questions. Do not stop in your pursuit of knowledge. If you haven't already encountered other trans people, you will. You will encounter people in your practice who are queer and non-monogamous and kinky humans, and who better to create space for them to let them bring their whole selves. Thank you.
So there's lots of thank yous and everything coming up in the chat. But just as a general comment, I really appreciate you being here tonight, Abbie. I think that this was a really wonderful opportunity for the students. And hopefully the ones who are not here get to watch this recording and learn lots of stuff as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out. I'm always available.
Yeah, I've been kind of writing down the different resources and stuff so that I can send them all to you in some announcements. You know, if you'd like to get in touch with Abbie, just let me know. I can also put their website up there.
Rock on.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Enjoy the last of your pre-Friday.